Good day, classmates, and especially to you, Ma'am Elnie. For today, I will be discussing about behavioral analysis, which is B.F. Skinner's theory. First, let us define what is behavioral analysis. Based on my research, behavioral analysis is a neuroscience that seeks to understand the behavior of individuals. That is, behavioral analysis study how biological, pharmacological, and experiential factors influence the behavior of humans and human animals. The analyst, like B.F. Skinner, he is trying to seek an understanding of the behavior of every individuals, like humans and animals, kung paano or bakit ganun siya na magkatao. Who is B.F. Skinner? His complete name is Perhus Frederick Skinner. He was born on March 20, 1904, in the small town of Susquehanna, Pennsylvania. He is an American psychologist. B.F. Skinner is best known for developing the theory of behaviorism and for his utopian novel Walden 2. His father was a lawyer and his mother stayed home to care for Skinner and his younger brother. At an early age, Skinner showed an interest in building different gadgets and contraptions. As a student of Hamilton College, B.F. Skinner developed a passion for writing. He tried to become a professional writer after graduating in 1926 but with little success. 2 years later, Skinner decided to pursue a new direction for his life. He enrolled at Harvard University to study psychology. B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning. Operant conditioning subjects operate on their environment in order to produce desired consequences. Skinner's ABCs of behaviors: A. Antecedent stimuli that were present before a behavior occurs. B. Behavior that is imitated. And C. Consequences that is follow the behavior. B.F. Skinner was one of the most influential of American psychologists. A behaviorist, he developed the theory of operant conditioning. The idea that behavior is determined by its consequences, be they reinforcements or punishments, which make it more or less likely that a behavior will occur again. Skinner believed that the only scientific approach to psychology was one that studied behaviors, not internal or subjective mental processes. Have you heard about Pavlov's dogs? That's the experiment conducted by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, wherein his dog started to salivate when he rang a bell. This is the best known example of classical conditioning when a neutral stimulus is paired with conditioned response. So, yung dog daw, if nakakarinig siya, so this is according to Ivan Pavlov's, if makakarinig yung dog ng bell, maglalaway siya, magsasalivate siya. Kasi, yung bell na yun yung sign na bibigyan na siya ng pagkain or kakain na siya. So, ayun. Considering free will to be an illusion, Skinner saw human action as dependent on consequences of previous actions, a theory he would articulate as the principle of reinforcement. If the consequences to an action are bad, there is a high chance the action will not be repeated. If the consequences are good, the probability of the action being repeated becomes stronger. So, in our everyday lives, we have also examples of classical conditioning. Number 1, smartphone, tones, and vibes. When you are in a public area and you hear the familiar ringtone and you hurry pick up your phone and you realize it's coming someone else's phone. Yung ringtone, yan yung neutral stimulus. Through classical conditioning, you've come to associate with the positive feeling of reading a message. Katulad rin yan nang bigla mong kunin yung phone mo kasi nafe-feel mo na nag-vibrate nag-vibrate siya kahit hindi naman. So, another example sa akin when I was a child, yung sa tuwing ako ay dadaan sa isang malaking bahay at may nakita akong aso na tinatahol ako at ramdam ko kakagatin niya na ako kasi nakalabas yung ngipin niya. And then years later, hindi naman natin ma-remember yung childhood dogs. Pero naalala natin if dadaan tayo sa familiar na bahay at nakalagay na sign doon na beware of dog. So, ayun. Start na nanginginig tayo sa takot. And then, Skinner developed behavior analysis, especially the philosophy of radical behaviorism, and founded the experimental analysis of behavior, a school of experimental research psychology. He also used operant condition to strengthen behavior, considering the rate of response to be the most effective measure of response strength. To study operant conditioning, he invented the operant conditioning chamber, or the aka the Skinner box, and to measure rate, he invented the cumulative recorder. So, isa rin pala yung example sa ito dito sa action, bad action will not be repeated, and if the consequences are good, possible siya na ulit yung action. So, katulad ng report card. So, maybe each time we both great report card to our parents, and our parents would take us for a dinner at our favorite restaurant, and pupurian nila tayo. And then next time, naka-receive na naman tayo ng mataas na grades, we already happy, and that is anticipating those positive consequences. Kasi, if magdadala tayo ng good report card sa parents natin, matutuwa sila sa atin, and then, ni-invite nila tayo sa ating favorite restaurant kasi nga nakakuha tayo ng mataas na grades, or sinasabihan nila tayo na we're so proud of you. So, for the next semester naman, strive hard tayo kasi alam na naman natin yung consequences na makuha natin kung mataas yung grades natin. So, okay. Next, the Skinner box. Skinner's operant conditioning chamber, is also called a Skinner box, was designed to teach rats how to push a lever. This behavior is not natural to rats, so operant conditioning with positive and negative reinforcement were performed in order to teach the behavior. Positive reinforcement. A rat was awarded with food when he pressed the lever. The negative reinforcement naman, a rat was able to turn off electronic shocks produced by the floor by pressing the lever. So, as what you can see, may daga na nasa loob. Yan yung Skinner box. At may green at red button. Yung daga, pipress niya lang yung lever when the light green is on, at dun niya na makuha yung pagkain niya. At kung ipipress naman niya yung lever habang naka-red light, ang ma-receive niya is electronic shock. As a result, natututo siya na pindutin lang yung lever when the light green is on, and they will avoid the red light. So, ayan yung Skinner box. Foundations of Skinner's behavior. Skinner's ideas about behaviorism were largely set forth in his first book, Behavior of Organisms, 1938. Here, he gives a systematic description of the manner in which environmental variables control behavior. He distinguished two sorts of behavior which are controlled in different ways. Respondent behaviors are elicited by stimuli and may be modified through respondent conditioning, often called classical or Pavlovian conditioning, in which a neutral stimulus is paired with an inciting stimulus. Such behaviors may be measured by their latency or strength. Operant behaviors are imitated, meaning that initially they are not induced by any particular stimulus. They are strengthened through operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning, in which the occurrence of a response yields a reinforcers. Such behaviors may be measured by their rate. Origin of operant behavior. The origin of a new bodily structure, namely variation of selection, and similarly the behavior of an individual, varies from moment to moment. A variation that is followed by reinforcements strengthened and becomes prominent in the individual's behavioral report here. Shaping was Skinner's term for the gradual modification of behavior by the reinforcement of desired variations. Skinner believed that superstitious behavior can arise when a response happens to be followed by reinforcement to which it is actually unrelated. Control of operant behavior. A stimulus comes to control an operant if it is present when the response is reinforced, and absent when it is not. For example, if lever pressing only brings food when light is on, a rat or child will learn to press the lever only when the light is on. Skinner summarized this relationship by saying that a discriminative stimulus, example yung light, sets the occasion for the environment reinforcement, yung food, of the operant yung lever press. This three-term contingency stimulus response reinforcer is one of Skinner's most important concepts and sets his theory apart from theories that use only pairwise associations. Explaining complex behavior. Most behavior of humans cannot easily be described in terms of individual responses reinforced one by one, and Skinner devoted a great deal of effort to the problem of behavior complexity. Some complex behavior can be seen as a sequence of relatively simple responses, and here Skinner invoked the idea of chaining. Chaining is based on the fact, experimentally demonstrated, that a discriminative stimulus not only sets the occasion for subsequent behavior, but it can also reinforce a behavior that precedes it. That is, a discriminative stimulus is also a conditioned reinforce. For example, the light that sets the occasion for lever pressing may also be used to reinforce turning around. The presence of a noise. This results in the sequence noise. Turn around, light, press lever, food. Much longer chains can be built by adding more similar responses. Skinner recognized that a great deal of behavior, especially human behavior, cannot be accounted for by gradual shaping or the construction of responses sequences. Complex behavior often appears suddenly in its final form, as when a person first finds his way to the elevator by following instructions given at the front desk. To account for such behaviors, Skinner introduced the concept of rule-governed behavior. First, relatively simple behaviors come under the control of behavior stimuli that children learns to jump, open the book, and so on. After a large number of responses come under such verbal control, a second's verbal stimuli can evoke an almost unlimited variety of complex responses. So dito to sa verbal behavior, also known as VB, is a method of teaching language that focuses on the idea that a meaning of a word is found in their functions. According to Skinner, the basic verbal parts of language is broken into parts that have different objectives. The echoes, which is vocal, mand, the requesting, the fact, the labeling, and the intraverbal is the conversation skills. For example, yung bata nagsalita siya ng apple, then binigyan siya ng apple, inuulit niya na yung salita na yun kasi alam na niya kung sasabihin niya yung word na yun, ay bibigyan siya ng apple. Yan yung positive reinforce sa verbal behavior. Reinforcement. Reinforcement theory. Manager praises the employee. Positive reinforcement, positive behavior followed by positive consequences. Negative reinforcement, positive behavior followed by removal of negative consequences. Punishment, negative behavior followed by negative consequences. Extinction, negative behavior followed by removal of positive consequences. So here's the operant conditioning. The effect of increasing the frequency of behavior by using consequences that are pleasant when they happen. Strengthens behavior, giving rewards for desired behavior. Positive reinforcement daw, yung gagawa ka ng, for example, sinabihan ka ng nanay mo na maglinis ka kasi aalis siya, and then pag uwi niya, may dala siyang pagkain, may dala siyang paborito mong pasalubong. So, ginagawa mo na siya, parang habit mo siya na tuwing aalis yun na linis ka talaga ng bahay kasi para dalan ka niya ng favorite food mo. Negative reinforcement, the effect of increasing the frequency of a behavior by using consequences. Punishment, the effect of decreasing the frequency of a behavior by using consequences that are unpleasant when they happen. Weakens behavior, taking away the something pleasant, giving something unpleasant for the undesired behavior. So, for example, sa negative negative punishment, weakens behavior siya. For example, always ka naglalaro ng phone mo at ayaw mo na mag-study. So, yung parents mo, kinuha nila yung phone mo para mag-study ka. So, yun yung negative punishment. Reinforcement, a key concept of behaviorism, is the primary process that shapes and controls behavior and occurs in two ways, positive and negative. In The Behavior of Organisms, 1938, Skinner defines negative reinforcement to be synonymous with punishment, the presentation of an aversive stimulus. This definition would subsequently be defined in science and human behavior. In what has now become the standard set of definitions, positive reinforcement is a strengthening of behavior by the occurrence of some event. Example, praise after some behavior is performed, whereas negative reinforcement is strengthening of behavior by the removal or avoidance of some aversive event. Example, opening and raising an umbrella over your head on rainy day is reinforced by the cessation of raining falling on you. Both types of reinforcement strengthen behavior or increase the probability of a behavior reoccurring. The difference between and whether the reinforcing event is something applied, positive reinforcement, or something removed or avoided, the negative reinforcement. Punishment can be the application of an aversive stimulus or the event, positive punishment or punishment by contingent stimulus or the removal of a desirable stimulus, negative punishment or punishment by contingent withdrawal. Punishment is often used to suppress behavior. Skinner argued that this suppression is temporary and has a number of other, often unwanted consequences. Extinction is the absence of rewarding stimulus which weakens behavior. Ayan, types of reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, when a pleasant consequences follows a response, making the response more likely to occur. Negative reinforcement, when an unpleasant consequences is removed following a response, making the response more likely to recur. Positive reinforcement, adding traits to increase good behavior. So, ayan, as you can see sa pictures, yung grade niya mataas, and then nag-increase yung behavior. Positive reinforcement siya kasi binibigyan siya ng pagkain. kapag nakakuha siya ng mataas na grades. At dito, makakakuha siya ng pera if maglilinis siya. And then, positive reinforcement, induce a reinforcement stimulus following a specific behavior. Yung tao, tinitrain niya yung aso na mimigyan niya ng pagkain if kaganyan siya or hihiga siya. So, the negative reinforcement, mother taking away the table smartphone from her daughter. So, ayan, kinuhan ng mother yung phone kasi siguro hindi nag-study at hindi naglinis ng bahay. So, schedules of reinforcement. Skinner recognized that behavior is typically reinforced more than once, and together with Charles Fester, he did an extensive analysis of the various ways in which reinforcements could be arranged over time, calling it the schedules of reinforcement. The most notable schedules of reinforcement studied by Skinner were continuous, interval, fixed or variable, and ratio, fixed or variable. All are methods used in operant conditioning. So, the continuous reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement, each time a specific action is performed, the subject receives a reinforcement. This method is effective when teaching a new behavior because it quickly establishes an association between the target behavior and the reinforcer. For example, you are trying to teach a dog to shake your hand. While you are grabbing the dog's paw, yung kamay ng dog, kinukuha mo yun, tapos you say the word shake. And binibigyan mo siya ng reward every time nakakagawa siya ng pag-shake ng hands. Every time nasasabihin mo na shake, mag-shake siya. So, ginagawa niya yung bagay niya yon kasi alam niya na may reward siya. Which is, ginagawa niya at naiisip niya na pag nag-shake siya ng hands, may pagkain siya. Interval schedule based on time intervals between reinforcement. Fixed interval schedule, or the FI, a procedure in which reinforcements are presented at fixed time periods, provided that the appropriate response is made. This schedule yields a response rate that is low just after reinforcement and becomes rapid just before the next reinforcement is scheduled. And so, for example, dito is college students studying for final exams. That is a fixed interval schedule. So, yung mga estudyante, hindi sila nagsistudy at the beginning of the class or at the beginning of the semester, but they cram when it's almost time. Pero, habang paparating na yung final exam, doon na sila nagmamadali na mag-study. Ito daw, ang pag-study, yan yung targeted behavior at yung exam result is the reinforcement. Because ang exam only occurs at fixed intervals, usually at the end of a semester. Many students do not pay attention in studying during the semester until the exam time comes. So, variable interval schedule, a procedure in which behavior is reinforced after scheduled but unpredictable time durations following the previous reinforcement. This schedule yields the most stable rate of responding, which the average frequencies of reinforcement determining the frequency of response. So, dito naman, sa variable interval schedule, ito yung mga students na nag-study regularly instead na nagmamadali kung papalapit ng exam. Alam ng estudyante dito na magbibigay ng surprise quizzes ang mga teachers, pero hindi niya ma-determine kung kailan. Ito yung mas effective than the fixed interval schedules of reinforcement. So, next is fixed ratio schedule. A produced procedure in which reinforcement is delivered after a specific number of responses have been made. Fixed ratio example naman, ito yung, for example, yung mga mananahe or mga dressmakers, specifically yung mga factory talaga ng mga damit, for example. Then, may isang store na order siya ng 5 batches of clothes. Yung dressmakers, gagawa siya ng mga damit na mataas pa sa kukunin ng isang store para makabenta siya ng marami. So, that tataas na yung sales niya. Variable ratio schedule, VR, a procedure in which reinforcement comes after a number of responses that is randomized from one reinforcement to the next, especially slot machines. The lower the number of responses required, the higher the response rate tends to be. Variable ratio schedules tend to produce very rapid and steady responding rates in contrast with fixed ratio schedules where the frequency of response usually drops after the reinforcement occurs. So, example dito sa variable ratio schedule is pagsusugal. For example, itong slot machine daw. Slot machine or lottery games is a classic example of variable reinforcement schedule. Gambling rewards unpredictably. So, hindi natin alam kung mananalo tayo or hindi, in which winning requires a different number of lever pulls. Gamblers keep pulling the lever many times in hopes of winning. Therefore, for some people, gambling is not only habit-forming but is also very addictive. So, ayun nga. Hindi natin, pag nagsusugal tayo, risky talaga siya kasi hindi natin ma-determine if mananalo tayo or mananalo tayo. Next is behavior modification. Often referred to as beam mode, is a therapy technique based on Skinner's work. It is very straightforward, extinguish an undesirable behavior by removing a reinforcer and replace it with a desirable behavior by reinforcement. It has been used on all sorts of psychological problems, addictions, neurosis, shyness, autism, even schizophrenia, and works particularly well with children. There are examples of backward psychotics who haven't communicated with others for years, who have been conditioned to behave themselves in fairly normal ways, such as eating with a knife and fork, taking care of their own hygiene needs, dressing themselves, and so on. Psychotherapy used. Behavior therapy is based on the principles and procedures of the scientific method. Experimentally derived principles of learning systematically applied to help people change their maladaptive behavior. Behavior therapists state treatment goals in concrete objective in terms to make replication of their interventions possible. Treatment goals are agreed upon by the client and the therapist. Throughout the course of therapy, the therapist assessed problem behaviors and the conditions that are maintaining them. Research methods are used to evaluate the effectiveness of both assessment and the treatment procedures. Therapeutic techniques employed must have demonstrated effectiveness. In short, behavioral concepts tested empirically and revised continually. Behavior therapy deals with the client's current problems and the factors influencing them. as opposed to an analysis of possible historical determinants. Behavior therapy is an action oriented and educational approach, and learning is viewed as being at the core of therapy. Clients learn new and adaptive behaviors to replace old maladaptive behaviors. Behavior therapists operate on the premise that changes in behavior can occur prior or simultaneously with understanding of oneself, and that behavior changes may well lead to understanding. Criticism of the theory of B.F. Skinner, which is the behavioral analysis. Chomsky, a prominent critic of Skinner, published a review of Skinner's verbal behavior 2 years after it was published. Chomsky argued that Skinner's attempt to use behaviorism to explain human language amounted to little more than word games. Conditioned responses could not account for a child's ability to create or understand an infinite variety of novel sentences. Chomsky's review has been credited with launching the cognitive revolution in psychology and the other disciplines. Skinner, who rarely responded directly to critics, never formally replied to Chomsky's critique. Many years later, Kenneth McCardell's reply was endorsed by Skinner. Chomsky also reviewed Skinner's Beyond Freedom and Dignity, using the same basic motives as his verbal behavior review. Among Chomsky's critics were that Skinner's laboratory work could not be extended to humans, that when it was extended to humans, it represented scientific behavior attempting to emulate science but which was not scientific, that Skinner was not a scientist because he rejected the hypothetico-deductive model of theory testing, and that Skinner had no science of behavior. Last is the concept of humanity. In utopian novel called Walden 2 and the 1971 bestseller called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, he argued that human behavior was always controlled by its environment. According to Skinner, the future of humanity depended on abandoning the concepts of individual freedom and dignity and engineering the human environment so that behavior was controlled systematically and to desirable ends rather than haphazardly. So that's all for my report. I hope you understand. Thank you.